Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with hosts Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please look us up on your favorite podcast app, subscribe, like, and share so that you never miss an episode. If you'd like to further support us, visit patreon.com/speakingout and check out the different rewards. You'll find exclusive rewards if you sign up as a patron of the podcast. Thank you for your support, and let's get into the show. Welcome to this week's podcast. As always, we thank our patrons who help make this podcast possible. We love and appreciate you guys. We just are so thankful. And it seems like every week we get a little trickle of more patrons. Last week we had a couple of you sign up as patrons. And every time we get that notification, I text Mom because I have the app on my phone.
Yes.
And so as soon as we get another patron, I text Mom and I'll be like, guess what? So
That's a big, huge encouragement.
it is.
Yes,
It's super encouraging
yes.
just to know that there are
It
people
is.
listening and that you guys believe in what we do.
Yes.
And that you guys want to be part of our community. It's really
Part of
cool.
our growing community, by
Yes.
the way, and part of a needed community.
Yes.
Yes.
So we
Thank
do
you.
still
Yes.
need new patrons
Yes.
all the time. That's what keeps this podcast going. I promise you that. So
Yes.
if you would like to visit patreon.com/speakingout, look at the different tiers, see what the different benefits are, and just pick one that suits you. And even if it's $5 a month, you can start there. So
I think
there's something for
$5 a
everybody.
month is a great start, by the way.
It's a bargain,
yeah.
Granny.
Well, you don't want to know what I paid for my Starbucks? I wouldn't
Probably
have
more
paid
than
it.
5.
I would, yeah, it is now. I wouldn't have paid it unless it was with a gift card. It crushes me every time to think of
Yeah.
that. Yeah, so for less than a cup of coffee, you can support this podcast.
Absolutely.
And we thank you.
We do. All right, so we're coming off the heels of doing a 5-part series on detecting high-risk people. That was the Fruits tool that Mom and I developed. So, now that people have had time to listen to those and kind of process these high-risk people, knowing that they're out there. I mean, if you're listening to this podcast, you already know that there are high-risk people out there. You know that there are pedophiles who
over,
are
yes.
among us. And so this is a big question. What do we do about that?
Right.
That's the practical side of it that not many people are talking about. And so for this podcast, and maybe even the next couple, we want to talk about this issue of what do we do when we know that there are known sex offenders and a whole host of unknown sex offenders. They have yet to be discovered, but they're actively abusing children.
Mm-hmm.
They're living among us. What do we do with that? What do we do about that? And
Do we just turn our heads? I know years and years ago, we had 2 registered sex offenders in our small community where I live. To be perfectly honest with you, I didn't pay much attention to it.
Mm-hmm.
You know why? I didn't know that much information. I knew very
Right.
little. And I knew that these 2 people were registered sex offenders. And I basically just said, stay away from that house, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And shame on me for not knowing, digging deeper. But at that time, 20 years ago, who paid attention to that?
Right.
We didn't.
Well,
But
and
now,
even today, who pays attention
right,
to them? And
today
that's the thing.
we don't have an
I don't-
excuse.
I
We
don't
really
think people pay
No.
attention to them
No,
today.
but we
Not
need
many
to.
people.
Right.
But we were talking about this in preparation for this podcast, and we said there are basically 3 different camps, I would say, where people stand, especially with registered sex offenders. So these are people who they spent time either being incarcerated or as part of a plea deal. They may not have spent time in prison, but they have to register for a sex offender for X number of years.
Right.
Usually that's anywhere from 5 or 10 years to being a lifetime registrant on the sex offender registry. So the different camps are, I would say there are kind of 2 extremes and then one in the middle. So the one extreme says, well, we ought to tie them up and put them on an island somewhere and set fire to the island and forget about them, kind of thing. Like out of sight, out of mind. They have no place in society. We should ban them from society as a whole, put them on an island somewhere. That's where they belong. The reality is that's never going to happen.
Right.
I understand the sentiment. I really do. But the reality is that's not a reality.
Exactly.
It's not going to happen.
Right.
Okay, then you have the other extreme, which is, I would say, where probably the majority of churches, and it does not matter your leaning, if you're a left-leaning or right-leaning church, doesn't matter. I have found absolutely zero difference between extreme right and extreme left when it comes to what do you do with registered sex offenders, and every church in between. The vast majority of churches, the overwhelmingly vast majority of churches, will take the exact opposite extreme and say, well, the grace of God is for everyone, in reference specifically to hardened, extreme criminals.
We've seen it time and time and time and time again. Just doing the interaction we've had. Excuse me, am I stepping on your
You're
foot?
playing footsies with me under here. We're in
I
tight
kept thinking
quarters
that
here.
was a wire under your desk, and I'm stamping on the wire, and it's just
what do we do with Granny over here?
That.
That's the question.
Yeah, sorry. Woo. But we've come across so many cases of this in the past however many years, and it kind of blows our minds yet to think that churches are still putting out the welcome sign for sex offenders.
And not only that, I mean, you bring up a great point, but it's not just that. They're actively welcoming.
Oh, yeah.
And letting it be known publicly that they welcome sex offenders in their churches. And we're a place where God's grace is for all. Come as you are.
Well,
all those slogans.
Jimmy,
these guys are listening. Believe me.
And we've heard things like, well, they've served their time. They've paid their penance. Leave them alone. Let them start fresh.
Yep.
We've heard it all. They've repented. Come on.
God
is
without
the
any
judge.
evidence of that. Yeah, without any evidence, they say, but they've repented.
How can we judge that person? We don't know their heart. It's our job to accept them in love. Everything from that to, isn't this our mission to save the lost? And on it goes. And it makes your head spin, because reality in this case is the statistics show us they're going to repeat.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Repeat their crime again.
Even, I want to mention 60 Minutes Australia. There's a segment, and I'll link to it in the description here. It's phenomenal. And they show, it's a trailer park here in the United States. It's in St. Petersburg, Florida. It's a trailer park specifically for sex offenders, registered sex offenders. They're confined to this trailer park, and it's kind of almost like a social experiment to see what's going to happen with this. And Lauren Book's dad, Ron Book, is one of the fiercest lawmakers in the country when it comes to sex offenders. And that's why, years ago you had the causeways in Florida where there were homeless populations of sex offenders living under these causeways because the laws were so strict with where they could live that virtually there was nowhere where they could live. And so they have this trailer park, and 60 Minutes recently did a really good episode on this. And I want to say James Cantor, Dr. Cantor, who is, in my opinion, kind of a little bit of a bleeding heart towards pedophiles. He's big into this virtuous pedophiles, which I'm not going to knock it completely, but I think he's a little bit too extreme, in my opinion. And virtuous pedophiles, of course, are people who have a sexual attraction towards children, but they're non-offending pedophiles, which I'm not as convinced that there's such a class of people. Not saying that it doesn't exist, but I'm a pessimist, okay?
As am I, yes.
But James Cantor even says in that short documentary or short docuseries or whatever it was, he said, science clearly shows in all of my research, he says, they're born in the womb. They're prone to be born with this attraction to minor children. He says there is nothing you can do in this lifetime to ever change that. Ever.
Now you're going to
That's coming from James Cantor,
okay,
who has a soft spot in his heart, so to speak, for pedophiles. Even he's saying, you will never, ever change their attraction
which
towards
creates
children.
an
Never.
even bigger gap, I think, in Christendom, because they'll come back and say God would never.
That's it. God can do anything.
Yes,
Yeah.
God can do anything. God would never allow a person to be born with a sin that is going to condemn them to hell,
Right.
and not allow them to repent.
That's
so,
right.
It is really this crazy, crazy, jagged edge of thinking and understanding that puts this whole ball of wax into a mess.
Yeah.
It's just a big mess.
That's right. So, those are kind of the two extremes, though.
Right.
So ship them off to an island, never see or hear from them again. Welcome them, because Jesus welcomes everybody into the church. And like you said, there's nothing that God can't do to
Right.
overcome.
Yep.
And people can overcome all kinds of addictions. And so why not this? So we're going to take a chance, and we're going to welcome them in the church. They may or may not, usually not, put some restrictions on them. If those churches do put restrictions on them, you guys know my soapbox. Usually it's the leaders. They keep that a secret. They don't inform the church that there's a registered sex offender. They go out of their way to not inform the church that there's a registered sex offender in the church.
Right.
And they keep it hush-hush. It's between the leaders and that sex offender. And they just have free reign in the church.
I remember one of our interviews, and that the idea was brought out, really, do you want us to label a person as a sex offender? Are we going to label an alcoholic? Are we going to label, another, this?
Yeah, sometimes
this,
labels are helpful.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And they'll use that also as a reasoning, like, no, we're going to protect this person because they've repented. They're trying.
So it's nobody's business
Right.
what they did, just like for
Exactly
you.
right. Yep.
It's nobody's business
Don't
what
you
sins
have
you
hidden
have.
sins?
Your
Right.
your skeletons in your closet.
Not
It's nobody's
the same.
business.
Not
No,
the
it's not.
same.
No, it's not.
Very much not the same.
So you have those two extremes, and then you have in the middle, which is kind of what you talked about, where you're kind of not really indifferent, but maybe uninformed. And you're like, well, I know there are registered sex offenders out there. You'd have to be asleep under a rock somewhere to not know that we have registered sex offenders in virtually every town in America. But because it doesn't affect me directly, or because I don't have small children myself, or because ... fill in the blank, I'm just not really that concerned with it.
Right.
Okay? So those are kind of the three, I think, on the spectrum, kind of the three zones that people usually land in. So the question is, what do you do about it? And, what's interesting about this 60 Minutes Australia story that was done on Pedophile Village, or whatever it's called, I think that's what they called it.
I want to watch that. I haven't watched that.
It's really good, and it's
Jenny.
only 20 minutes long.
I really want to watch that.
It was really well done. And they said at the beginning, the conclusion for the effect that this has on the pedophiles might surprise you. And so if you hear any pedophile talk, and a lot of researchers talk about pedophilia, they'll say isolation is a trigger. They need community because when they feel down on themselves, when they feel depressed, when they feel whatever, there's an empty hole in their life, that's when they really offend. That's when they actively go out and they seek victims to offend.
That's true of a lot of murderers, mass murderers.
And I'm not even arguing with that.
Right,
I'm not arguing with that argument.
I get where you're going.
Statistically, that's probably true. But what's interesting about Pedophile Village, or I forget what it's called. That's what I'm going to call it.
I like hearing. I like that name for whatever reason. I don't like what it represents, but I like that. Yeah. It's easy to understand.
So what's fascinating is they interviewed one main guy in this series, and he actually was the first time ever that I've heard a pedophile say this. He's like, I don't think we do belong out in society. He's like, and not that they don't work, because they do. I think they go out and they work jobs, which I'm all for. I mean, I am for people being
jobs,
productive members of society. Certain jobs they should never have. Anywhere where they have any exposure to kids, period, they shouldn't work those jobs. But what he was saying is, I worked myself to be here. I deserve to be here.
Right.
I can't be trusted. He said, I think about little children. I think about them sexually. I want to do those things to children. That's how I'm wired. Therefore, by that definition, I have no business being around children.
And I respect that.
I do too. Absolutely, I respect it. And I respect him for saying it.
I respect that. Yes.
And so he was saying that this community is good both for the children and for the pedophiles. And they're getting community.
They are. Yeah.
This is the thing that kills me. Community doesn't have to happen with children.
Right.
That empty hole of people needing communion, community rather, it does. Why does it have to include children?
Right. It does not, should not.
You can have normal relationships, great friendships with people, solid, rock solid friendships with people that don't include little children.
Why would you, and this is on a totally different level, but a person that's an alcoholic, why would you sit them in a setting where you have a whole bar full of different bottles of drinks for them to look at, when you know the torment is, and it is a torment if you talk to an addicted person.
Yeah.
When the torment is, I just want to reach over and grab that because I think about it all the time.
Yeah, you're around it all the time. Eventually you will reach out.
Right. Same with any kind of narcotics, drugs, whatever. We hear so much of people being addicted to painkillers and whatnot. Why would we fill that person's cupboards full of narcotics and expect them then, because they repented of whatever, to expect them not to touch.
Right.
We wouldn't.
Yeah, it makes no sense.
We wouldn't do that. Right.
And that's what drives me nuts is we get that, we understand that when it comes to narcotics or alcohol or whatever. All of us get that.
Exactly.
We understand that. No church would be like, yeah, it's a great idea to put a recovering alcoholic in the bar, or it's a great idea.
Let me use another example, since this is a hot topic right now. Why would we put a person who has severe anger and mood issues in a gun shop? Why would we put that person, give that person a job in a gun shop?
Yeah.
Same thing, why would we give a pedophile a job teaching Sunday school to little kids?
Right.
We wouldn't.
Right.
We would not
makes no sense.
do that.
Right.
It makes zero sense.
But yet when it comes to pedophiles,
sense.
almost inevitably in the church, in the religious communities, they're like, oh, well, we welcome everybody. We'll put a couple restrictions on them. But that'll be between the leaders and them.
And what you and I have spoken on week after week after week after week and interviewed person after person, we know those restrictions don't work.
It does not work.
They simply challenge that person to get slicker with their thinking, to get more refined with their techniques.
Yeah.
So it's not going to stop. It enhances them.
Exactly right. And I make this argument all the time. That's not an act of grace or mercy for the pedophile to put them around kids and say, well, we're going to have you sign this secret covenant.
Yeah, little covenant.
And we'll keep it between you and us. But we're going to put you around this sea of children where you can look at them. Now, keep in mind, what happens with pedophiles is it's all up here. All right?
Right.
They're thinking about children sexually
Constantly,
always.
yes, constantly. And I think that's where we get off track, because in our humanness, we're not sitting thinking of things like that constantly. We're busy with our jobs. We're busy with family life. We're busy with community. We're busy with volunteering, all these different things, hobbies, whatnot. We are not so engrossed in sex or in hurting. It's hurting. It's a very pointed hurting, purposeful hurting someone that's all we sit and plot and plan and think about. when we look at children, we see them in a different way. We see
Yeah.
kids as the youth of America, the youth of the world.
Mm-hmm.
We see promise and hope and all of that. When a pedophile looks at that child, and by the way, I got really awakened to this fact last night. I love to do those little TikTok reels.
Mm-hmm.
I love the ones on food and humor and whatnot. There was one where a mom did kind of an experiment where she posted like hundreds of pictures of her little girl in all different outfits and whatnot. And she wanted to see then who was looking at these pictures because they got like 1.5 million hits off of TikTok.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see somehow, I don't know how to do it, how many thousands of those were saved. It was very interesting when the little girl, and she was like 3 or 4, wore a little bikini swimsuit. Thousands, like
Mm-hmm.
58,000 of her pictures were saved. What's that tell me? I would never save a picture of a child like
Right.
that. Never, ever, ever
Right.
in a million years. It's telling me there are eyes watching, waiting, looking, lusting, longing, planning, plotting. We're
Mm-hmm.
crazy if we think it's not happening. We're crazy.
Oh,
We're
absolutely. Yeah.
crazy
Yeah.
if we think that's not how their minds work.
Yeah, this is how they're thinking about your child, and they're not just thinking about your child sexually. They're thinking, how do I get that
Yeah.
child
How do
as my
I?
victim? How do
Yes.
I
Yes.
how do I have a sexual encounter and manipulate the child
Yeah.
and the child's parents and the church leaders? How do I
It's just,
how do I build this web of lies and manipulation
yeah.
in order
There you go.
to get to that child?
And
That's what they're
it's
thinking.
obsessive with their thinking. It's
Absolutely.
not like it's a fleeting thought. That's why I have a lot of trouble believing that those who are prone, who are attracted to children, have never acted upon it. Because let me tell you,
I agree, and that's where I
I
have a big difference with
yeah,
James
I
Cantor.
I have a lot of problem
I,
believing that.
I think with
A
his
lot
brain
of problem
scans
believing it.
and all the stuff that he shows where they are hardwired to think this way, I think he has phenomenal research. I think there's just, I mean, peer-reviewed research that's just really good. But where I part ways with him is that he believes really the majority of people who are pedophiles from birth, as he calls it, he believes the majority of them are virtuous pedophiles, meaning that they've never produced victims. I disagree with that.
Yeah, I
I
totally
think
disagree.
I think there's too much research that he's not looked at for whatever reason
And
that
I'm not
shows.
overly sure that a person is born into a predisposition of
Yeah, that
pedophilia.
I don't know or not. I'm
I
not a
mean, I
scientist. I
don't
don't
know at
know.
what point
I can tell you what my
research
feelings are,
will
but
ever prove that, but if you follow the track back in a pedophile's life, there's going to be consistencies with
mm-hmm,
pornography, um, you know, uh, childhood abuse of some kind that was maybe inflicted on them, or that they got a hold of porn books and started looking there, then went to videos and then advanced on. But there's going to be some tracing back to some kind of stuff that was not healthy
yeah.
at all
Yeah,
in
and,
their
and
thinking.
interestingly and importantly, the number one indicator for high recidivism rates among sex offenders, pedophile sex offenders, the number one indicator that you can look at, hands down, every single time and say, that person is very likely to wind up back in prison. Number one indicator is the number of sexual paraphilias that they
Yeah.
have.
Yeah. Right.
And there's a whole big long list of
Right.
paraphilias, from foot fetishes to voyeurism to exposure to, I mean, you name it. But
I think
once
it's a
somebody has,
progression.
once they have multiple paraphilias, research shows you can point to that person and say that person will inevitably wind up back in prison,
Right.
hands down.
Exactly. And
Number one
I
indicator.
think we get it. We get it to a degree, but we don't want to get it. Does that
Yeah.
make sense? We get it, but we don't want to get it.
Yeah. So, again, what do we do? And I think the Bible is really clear about this, about people who think in terms of deception, and that's their worldview. Is they look good on the outside. They work really hard to put up a facade and to look religious and to talk religious and uh, to express themselves with emotion and charisma and talk about how madly and deeply and vastly in love with God they are, and how everything in their life is dictated by God above. And they talk the talk. They even walk the walk, which is what our fruits thing is
Right.
about.
Right.
On the outside
You
of
know,
all these fruits, they
right.
walk the walk.
I
They really do.
reviewed that entire list of fruits 2 nights ago, and it is incredible. I would just ask everyone to keep looking through that, reading through it, because each time you do, you'll gain new insight into the mind of how a distorted pedophile's mind works and why they can hide that fruit, make it look so beautiful outside, but inside it is so rotten,
Yeah.
just so rotten.
Yeah, but I think if you were to sum up somebody who's so entrenched in deception and sexual predation and people who are opportunistic and all that stuff, I think if you were to sum it up in one Bible verse, it's 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 13, where Paul says, while evil people and imposters go on from bad to worse, deceiving and being deceived.
Right.
So there are two components that are wildly dangerous. One is the deception that it comes so naturally to
It
them.
does, yeah.
But there's also the self-deception, which is you can call it self-justification, where to get to that point where you can make it okay to do these horrific crimes against innocent children and excuse that away.
There's no
and look at other
conscience.
people and be
Yeah.
like, you know what? The problem's with you.
Yep,
And I'll never.
absolutely no conscience.
That's self-deception. I will never forget
Right.
that horrific exchange when I walked into my dad's apartment after he left the police station. He called me. I wrote about it in my book. I have a whole chapter on that. He called me up and he said, we need to talk. And I went over there. He didn't know that I was the one at the time. He didn't know that you and I had reported him. And he just started talking and rambling on. And he's like, actually pissed off at our society. And he's like, you know what? The whole reason I'm in trouble is because we have a screwed up society where, he said, if this were any other country, the things that I did to those little girls, it would be okay. It would be fine. But he said, we live in this country and we have the stupidest laws and our culture says that this isn't okay. And then I read the reports of what he actually did to his victims. And I wept. And it still gives me chills to think
It haunts me when I think
that
about
any
it.
human
Yes,
being
right.
is capable of doing that horrific of crimes against children that full bleeping well, that it's causing harm to that child, and you
And will
smile and do it anyway.
forevermore.
He
And
knew full
will-
well that
right.
he knew full well. He told me as much.
Right.
He knew full well that this was causing
I don't think our
horrific
minds,
lifelong
Jenny,
damage.
will ever grasp that because we're not black or living in dark. I guess that's what I want to
Yeah.
say. Void of God. And, when you look at the scriptures, it talks about people like that who Satan himself will bend and bow down to God Almighty. But that's still Satan.
Yeah.
And still Satan and his angels working every work of evil against the truth and light. And that's how I perceive pedophiles, because to take innocent children, then the Bible speaks clearly about when we harm children, what should be done, how we should think about that person. But and we know that abuse isn't just on wee little babies. When we're talking children, we're talking children that can be 13, 14, 15 years old. Immense pain has been caused that lasts a lifetime to that age also. And when you think about a mind that is so void of goodness and love
And reality.
and anything, truth, that could plot, plan, hurt. It's beyond murder.
Yeah.
It is beyond murder, because when you murder somebody, their pain ends.
Yeah, it's final.
It's final. That split second, it's done. But to do this kind of pain, you're putting pain in on a person that lasts forever. You can't
And knowingly. They
knowingly.
are
Yes.
the abusers are knowingly doing
Yes.
it, and they're justifying it in that self-deception, saying, well, you know, they didn't run away from me, so they must have
They
liked
came
it.
up to me and put the moves on me.
Yeah.
That little girl, she came up to me and started rubbing my hand and whatever, touching my leg.
Yep.
What was I supposed to do?
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the combination of deception and self-deception are, explosive.
Right.
People will always get harmed. Innocent people will always get harmed when you have that combination of deception and self-deception. And so Paul's message, and it's not gray. It's not even in the least bit gray. It's so black and white. He says,
Right.
avoid such people.
Right.
Those 3 words are super important. Now, of course, I think we're definitely going to go into next week, because this
I
doesn't
think we have to.
this doesn't bring
right.
up the issue of what do you do? Okay, they're still living among us. So
Right.
why don't we just ship them off to an island? If you're going to avoid every pedophile in every circumstance, why not ship them off on an island?
We need to crack open
And you
next
can't
time
do it.
what the word avoid means. What does it mean
And
to avoid?
in what circumstances do we
right.
avoid them?
How do we avoid? Jimmy and I, just to give you a little teaser for next week, we were talking beforehand. How would we handle our family life should his dad get released from prison?
Yes.
What would we do? Because
Yes.
he would be knocking at every door, saying, let me in, let me in, let me in.
Yeah.
And we have many, many children within
Yeah.
the family. So that'll be a little teaser for next week.
That's
Yeah,
right. Yeah,
lead
because
in. Yeah.
you do have, you have these different levels. So on the one level, I'm a church leader, so what do I do if I have a sex offender come knocking on our door, or who
you
just
go.
walks right in and
Right.
says, "Hey, I saw the welcome sign outside, and here I am." What do we do? And we have a written policy that is crucial to how we handle registered sex
Okay.
offenders.
Right.
That's written into policy. Okay. Then you have the familial relationships. What do you do? I mean, the vast majority of sex offenders don't spend long prison terms.
What about the wife? And I think we need to address this, because I get many, 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 many emails who is deemed by law that she must share custody
Yeah.
of her children with this known sex offender.
Yeah.
What happens
Yeah.
there?
So, we'll give different scenarios
Yeah.
like that, because, it's not this one
One size
fits all blanket
No.
policy. These are really complex issues. They really are. And again, the reality is there are pedophiles living among us everywhere. Right. Throw a stone from your house in any direction, unless you live really in the middle of nowhere. Throw a stone.
I live in the middle of nowhere, and I'm
You
telling
do.
you, they're among us. They're out there too.
But you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Throw a stone in any direction, and you're going to find pedophiles who are living among us.
Exactly.
They're here.
They're here.
They're not going anywhere.
No.
They're here to stay. So how do we function as a society and still keep children safe while we have these people who are living among us who are horrific criminals? It's a great question,
Part 2.
Yeah, we'll give you part 2 next week, and maybe there will be a part 3, 4, and 5 like there was on the fruits.
Or might have to be. We don't want to leave this an open-ended. We want to really sum it up. I think a good beginning for us would be to talk about the word avoid and what does that mean in different circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll take it from there.
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you for tuning into this episode, and we will catch you next round. Hopefully, we'll have a few more patrons next week.
Yeah.
All right.
That would be wonderful.
Thanks, guys. We love you. We will catch you next episode.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode. A special thank you to our patrons who make this podcast possible. Please help us get the word out by searching for the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast in your favorite podcast app. Be sure to hit subscribe and rate the show. Please consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron and check out the rewards our patrons receive.